Hi guys, and welcome to the Stephen King Sematary Club. I don't love the colors of this book. Good old Mr. King. I don't know why, but the orange does not work for me here. And I like orange, but I also don't. I feel like there was a lot they could have done with this, and they didn't. Alright, so let's get into it. The Dark Half, published in 1989. The author's note, quote, "I'm indebted to the late Richard Bachman for his help and inspiration. This novel could not have been written without him." I think that's very cute and appropriate. So our main character is Thad Beaumont. He was born in New Jersey, and he is currently living in Ludlow, Maine. So, typical Stephen King, born, ends up in Maine, even if he's not Maine born. And Ludlow, Pet Sematary, that's possibly... There's something about Ludlow that I love more than Castle Rock, which is the other place that the other setting for this book. Thad is a writer, which fits in with a lot of Stephen King stuff. And when he's 11, which is another important age, think about It, a lot of 11-year-olds in It. Thematically, 11 is a very important time. And Thad starts hearing sparrows, a whole bunch of sparrows chirping in his head. And these chirping episodes come before he has a headache. So they are a warning that he is about to have a terrible headache. So the headaches in his writing seem to come at the same time. Starts writing, starts getting headaches. He's suffering his headaches in a darkened room, alone, hoping that they'll kill him. And then eventually he's starting to worry that they won't kill him. It's a beautiful line. Quote, "He could do nothing when these headaches held him in their grip but lie in his darkened room waiting to die. By the end of September, he hoped he would die, and by the middle of October, the pain had progressed to the point where he began to fear he would not." Page 4. I love that. He wanted the headaches to kill him, and then eventually he realized it's even worse because they're probably not going to kill him. He's going to have to suffer through this for the rest of his life. His mom is very good to him. She encourages his writing. She frames a little submission thing that he got where he won a contest, but he didn't completely win the contest because he wasn't of the right age to enter it. And his father is just an asshole. So they take him to the doctor. The doctor thinks it's just migraine headaches, and there's nothing that can be done other than suffering through. So one day, Thad is out at the bus stop, and he starts having a seizure. So he gets brought back to the hospital, and they decide to take a scan of his brain. They see a shadowy thing in his scan, and it's possible that it's a tumor. The neurologist does some exploring in Thad's brain and sees, in an awesome description, an eyeball in his brain. An eyeball. And further investigation turns up fingernails, part of a nostril, and teeth. So the surgeon takes these items out. There's a whole discussion, a fascinating discussion, about how Thad at one point had a twin, and he absorbed his twin. And the absorbed parts ended up in his brain, and they have started agitating him because they're pressing on his brain. It's so cool and so creepy. So the surgeon, he ends up telling the parents that it was a benign tumor. Does not mention the fact that there was a twin involved. So right there, he's trying to do a good thing by not worrying them, and he thinks there's no cause for them to be made aware of this. But lack of information is going to bite everyone in the ass later. Okay, then we move on to present day. And the beginnings of the chapters are marked with excerpts from George Stark books. This one has stuck with me ever since I read this, so decades this has stuck with me. There's a guy who's being held, and Alexis Machine, who is the bad guy, he is threatening him with a paperclip. It says, Halstead squeezed his eyes shut, but it did no good. The small steel rod slid effortlessly through the left lid and punctured the eyeball beneath with a faint popping sound. The paperclip through the eyelid it's permanently etched in my brain. I think about it, not all the time, but I think about it often. Very memorable. This whole book has some very memorable things in it. So now we're in the present day. That was back in 1960. So now we're in the 80s. And Thad and his wife Elizabeth, they are standing over a grave, shaking hands. The grave is for George Stark. And we find out that is Thad's pseudonym. He writes crime books under the name George Stark because he's a serious author and he was feeling penned in and wanted to explore other genres, and his wife suggested just writing under a different name. George Stark, 1975 to 1988, not a very nice guy. That's what it says on the tombstone. And this is a People magazine article. We find out that Thad and Elizabeth are living in Ludlow, but they have a summer home in Castle Rock. They have 2 kids, William and Wendy. They are twins. And we also find out that Elizabeth had a miscarriage earlier in their marriage, and those were also twins. So George Stark, he writes using pencils. Thad uses a typewriter, but George Stark uses Barrel Black Beauty pencils. And he has a criminal backstory. He did a lot of his writing in jail, and he's a not very nice guy, like the tombstone says. And the reason that this article came out is because a man named Frederick Clausen was threatening Thad because he found out about his pseudonym, and he wanted to be paid off to keep the secret. And Thad and Elizabeth decided to just put an end to George Stark themselves, cut out Frederick Clausen, who's blackmailing them, and go right to People magazine. So with the death of George Stark, Thad has a nightmare. He's in what George Stark calls Ennsville, and George Stark is behind him the whole time. The only thing that Thad sees is an unlined palm of a hand, but he knows George is back there. He doesn't want to look at him. He is scared of him. And George shows him his house. Everything that Thad touches in his house is just instantly ruined, and the whole thing turns decrepit. And he sees Elizabeth at the end of a hall, obviously dead. Her hair's in her face and her legs are splayed out. It's very much, to me, like in Pet Sematary, when Rachel is dead and hanging out on the floor. It has that vibe, plus Judd's house is all crappy and run down, and it's completely shifted into this creepy Ennsville place. So then we go to the cemetery where Thad and Elizabeth had taken their photos for the burial of George Stark. And the guy who's in charge of the cemetery notices that one of the graves has been disturbed. So he runs over there, and it's the place where they set up that fake grave for George Stark. And he sees that it hasn't been dug into like a grave robber would do. It appears more like someone had been in the grave and had come out, had dug themselves out. So the shape of the grave is different, and you could see where things had been pulled apart by hand and not by spade. And the person coming out of the grave had boosted himself up. You could see the finger marks on the sides, the hauling up, the putting down the knee and the feet, and then standing up. And that is just a creepy image. You're in the cemetery, there's a plot that's not really a plot, it's waiting to be a plot, but they used it for a prop. And at the end of that chapter, we hear about the murder of Homer Gamish. And we don't exactly know what happened. Quote, Castle Rock has been, at least in recent years, an unlucky town, page 48. And it goes back on the history a little bit. It tells us about Sheriff George Bannerman, who was in Dead Zone and Cujo. And now it's Sheriff Alan Pangborn who's in charge. He's been around for about 8 years. And his police officer, kind of right-hand man, is Norris Ridgwick, and apparently he looks like Barney Fife, so that gives you a good visual. And we find out that a woman across the street from the cemetery, or maybe she's across the street but nearby, she saw a man in a suit late at night, after midnight, across the road, and it looked like he was going to come to her house, and he gave her the creeps. But she said a truck pulled by and picked him up as a hitchhiker. They took off, and she said it was Homer's truck. But he was found later that day. He was left in a ditch, beaten to death with his own prosthetic arm. He was a war veteran, and someone beat him to death with his own arm. So, quite horrifying. A police officer finds Homer's truck in Connecticut, abandoned, blood everywhere inside of it, all over the place, and fingerprints. And the cop has this really bad feeling, like something really bad had been in that truck, which kind of reminds me of The Night Flyer, the short story. Then we get the end of Frederick Clausen, which is a really great scene because he is living in DC. He's renting an apartment from a woman named Dodie Eberhardt, and she is going to get rent. He's behind on his rent. She's going to his apartment to ask him for the money. And he has told her his plan to extort Thad and Elizabeth, and it has backfired. But Dodie is a fan of George Stark. That's why she kind of let him have some grace period with the rent. And she arrives at the apartment, she walks in, and she sees a horrible, horrible gangland-style murder scene in front of her. Frederick is sitting in a chair, naked. His penis has been cut off, shoved in his mouth. His tongue has been cut out of his mouth and push-pinned to the wall. So it's leaving bloody streaks down the wall. And above it, written in blood with a finger, says the sparrows are flying again. But also the People article, where George Stark has been exposed, is push-pinned to Frederick's bare chest. So she is just the super tough woman. I think it said she's 6'3", and she thinks she strikes fear into people's hearts. She is a badass woman. Kind of like Kay from It, the one that Tom beats up to make her tell where Beverly is. She thought she was this, really tough chick, and not so much, because Dodie she hears a noise and she turns around expecting it to be the killer, Alexis Machine from the book, and she notices that the door kind of closes after someone, so the killer had been in the room with her and left, and she freaks out, locks herself in with Frederick, calls the police, and has kind of a hysterical reaction. It's a very good scene. You can feel the fear. It's very good. Then we have a chapter where Alan Pangborn and two troopers come to Thad's house, and they talk to him and Elizabeth. And Alan is just very hostile the whole time, will not listen to them. He wants to bring Thad down to the police station, and he's just being really rude considering that they are all kind of aware of each other since Thad has a house in Castle Rock, where Alan is from. And they find out he's there because of the murder of Homer, and that shouldn't really cause any worry or concern because Thad didn't do it, but the fingerprints that they found in the truck are a perfect match to Thad. Like an exact match. And Alan has a hard time letting it go. He eventually does, and they kind of drop the whole thing. Later that night, Alan comes back with a 6-pack of beer and apologizes and says, well, Homer was a friend, given all this information, this should have been an open and shut thing. Things like this are rarely exact with fingerprint science, and for it to be exact and not work because you have an alibi, because they ended up having a party that night. So Thad was cleared. But it is unprecedented. And at this point, Alan says there's been a second murder with the same fingerprints all over the place. Your fingerprints. And it was the Frederick guy, who Thad also has a connection to, because that's the guy who tried to blackmail him. So this whole thing is just so interesting. And you're wondering, well, what the hell? How exact fingerprints? What? And so the three of them kind of bond over the situation, but it does bring up a whole bunch of interesting thought experiments. Because Thad is saying, well, you're wondering if I have a twin, right? You're wondering if I have a secret twin and one of us committed the murder and the other hosted this party, and one of us went to Connecticut and came back and then jetted off to Washington, D.C. and committed that murder and came back. And it is all connected to Thad. And Thad himself is unaware. He says his parents are dead, and he's the only person in his family left other than his wife now and then his two children. So his two children are technically his only blood relatives, and he has no idea about the absorbed twin issue. So we're going to leave it there for today. We will pick up with chapter 9, which is the invasion of the Creepazoid, and that hopefully be next week. I am hoping to get back on a weekly schedule with the Stephen King Cemetery Club. Hopefully.